Okay, good morning, everybody. Daf Tes Vav Amud Aleph, halfway down. Mordechai Yoda es kol asher nasa. Says the Gemara. We want to know my Amma. It says that he went out and he was crying. So what was he? What was he saying while he was crying? Rav Amma. Rav says, Gova Haman Machashverosh. He cried that Haman is even haughtier than Achashverosh, meaning that Haman was bold enough to propose the destruction of the Jews, in contrast to Achashverosh, who had not even thought about such a thing. It's true that Achashverosh was an anti-Semite, right? But he had never taken such a bold step to make a decree that to wipe out all the Jews. But here, Haman had the chutzpah to make such a decree. That's what Mordechai was crying about. Or Shmuel says, no. Gova Malka Ilah mi Malka Tata. He cried that the upper king, meaning Hashem, has prevailed over the lower king, Achashverosh. Now, many times we have an expression which is euphemistic to basically say the opposite, but because it's disrespectful to say that Achashverosh overpowered Hashem, so we say it in the reverse, that the higher king Hashem had prevailed over lower king. But really what he was saying is that he was crying over the fact that Achashverosh seemed to be making a decree that would show Hashem to be impotent, chas v'shalom. So, says the Gemara, when Esther heard about this, then it says her whole body wilted. But what is this word vatischalchal, which means kind of like hollowed? What does this mean? Her innards turned. What does this mean?
Being shaken.
Oh, so by vatischalchal says the Gemara, you have two opinions. Amar Rav. Rav says sheper sanida. It means that she began to menstruate. That's what happened when she heard the news. It was so shocking for her that it caused her to become a nida. But Rabbi Yirmiyah says that her bowels loosened, which means to say she needed to go to the bathroom as a result of this. Then the next verse says, Vatikra Esther Lasach. After she had heard what happened, so she went and she called Hasach because she wanted to send a messenger to Mordechai. So Amma Rav Hasach. Rav says, Hasach zed Daniel. Who's Hasach? Hasach actually refers to Daniel. Why was Daniel given the name Hasach? Why was Daniel given the name Hasach? Says the Gemara, because they cut him down from his greatness. Because although he was very great and elevated in the houses of Belshazzar and Darius and Koresh, but nevertheless, when Achashverosh came into power, he demoted him, and that's why he was called Hasach. You change the hay for a ches, and you get chotach, which means that he was cut down from his greatness.
Rabbi,
yes.
How come it doesn't say in the Megillah Hasach Shehu Daniel?
How come it doesn't say Hasach Shehu Daniel? It's a good question. I'm trying to think. Who does it say? Where in the Megillah does it do that for someone else? I guess with. I'm not sure.
Like we're asking why is it in a hidden way that it's saying who it is? So we're explaining we know who it is, but why does it have to intimate that? Why doesn't it just clearly say? I mean, Hasach is teaching us a lesson, but add Shehu Daniel so people won't be mistaken and think Hasach is somebody else.
I don't know the answer. I will try to look into it, and I will come back to you, Blinenda, tomorrow with an answer. It's a good question. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Shekol Divrei Malchus Dichtochin Alpiv. The reason why he was called Hasach is not because he was demoted, but on the contrary, he was elevated to such a high position that all the royal affairs were decided by him. So he was the guy who decided what goes on the teleprompter. so that's why his name was Hasach. Says the Gemara further, Lodas Malzeh Va'al Malzeh. Esther sent Hasach to Mordechai to find out what this was and why it was, right? So, Omer of Yitzchok, what does this mean? Shol Chaloi, Esther teaches sent a message to Mordechai, Shema Ovru Yisrael Al Chamishlichum Shatayra. She said perhaps the Jewish people had transgressed the 5 books of the Torah. In other words, she wants to understand, how did this decree come about? What did the Jewish people do to deserve such a thing? So she was thinking maybe they had violated something in the Torah, specifically maybe something from the Aseret Adibros. As we see, that Steve Bahen, it says about the Aseret Adibros, Mizeh or Mizeh, Hem Ksuvim, on this side, and on this side they are written. So we know that there was a miracle that took place with the Aseret Adibros, that the Luchos, they were carved right through, and some of the letters were hanging, but they stayed and remained even though they were hanging. But the point is that they were carved right through. And to teach us this, it says mizeh or mizeh heim ksuvim, on this side and on that side they are written, which refers to the Aseret Adibros. So that's what the words in the Megillah ladas malzeh al malzeh is going on. She's sending a message to Mordechai. Perhaps the Jewish people had violated the Torah. So now, when it comes to relaying back the message that Mordechai told Esther all about the story of the 10,000 gold silver talents that Haman had paid to have the Jewish people destroyed, right? So Mordechai told Esther, sent a message to Esther that she should go to the king and she should beg for the Jewish people. So when Esther came back and said she can't go, and gave a reason why she can't go, because she hasn't been for 30 days, she hasn't been summoned, and you cannot go to the king without being summoned. So it says, Esther. They told Mordechai the words of Esther. Who's they? We started off with Esther sending a message to Asach. And then we have Asach coming back to Esther, telling Esther what Mordechai said. Then you have Esther sending back a message saying that she can't come. And it says that they related to Mordechai. So the Gemara is asking, who's they? Says the Gemara, it's telling me that they, other people went, but Asach himself did not go back to Mordechai. Why? Because he didn't want to go and give the bad news that Esther was not going to go and do what Mordechai had asked. Says the Gemara, Mikan, from here, we learn that when sent on a mission, one should not report back with bad news. In other words, sometimes you have people, as soon as they hear some bad news, they run to tell everybody, right? It's never a wise thing to be the conveyor of bad news. Just, you can leave it to somebody else to tell the bad news. Good news, of course, you should share with as many people and as often as possible. But bad news, it's not always wise to go and report back bad news. And so here, when Esther was refusing to go to the king, Asach, Daniel, didn't want to go back and tell that news to Mordechai. He let other people do that. So now, once they came back to Mordechai and they told Mordechai what Esther has said, he sent back a message to Esther explaining to her that it may be for this very hour that she was made to be queen and she shouldn't pass the opportunity to make a difference. So then she turned around and said, okay, I'll go. But first, what you need to do is you have to gather all the Jews. It says in the Megillah, Lech es kol haYehudim ad asher lo kadas. That whole pasuk says, go and gather all the Jews, right? And then it concludes with saying that I will go to the king asher lo chados, not according to the custom, which means without being summoned. So what does this mean? Asher lo chados. Says the Gemara, Omar Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Abi explained that her words, shelo chados haya, it will not be like the custom of every day, which means to say, shebechol yom v'yom, every single day, ad achshav, until now, ba'oines, I had relations with Achashverosh under compulsion, but now v'achshav b'rotzei, but now it's going to be with my consent, which means to say as follows. We learned in the Gemara earlier that Achashverosh, wanted to have relations with Esther every single day, right? That's how much he liked her. And every single day, he summoned her and he had relations with her. Now, as the Gemara said earlier, for 30 days, she was not summoned. And we say that that's part of the miracle because through this, she would be more wanted by Achashverosh. But the point is, she had not been summoned. So up until that point, any time that she had relations with Achashverosh, she was done. This was by force. She had no choice. And so therefore, she was still allowed to be married to Mordechai, right? So therefore, Esther concludes her message, says the Gemara, "V'chasher ovadati, ovadati." And if I am lost, I am lost.
Rabbi,
Yes.
do any of the commentaries explain why, if he's having relations every single day and all of a sudden comes this 30-day period, why that's happened?
The Gemara, I think the Gemara, we mentioned it in the Gemara that it's part of the Ness. It was part of the miracle that Hashem made a miracle that Achashverosh should not call her for 30 days, so that when she comes after 30 days, his desire for her would intensify because he hadn't been with her for such a long time. It was all part of being able to bring about the miracle. So she says that kasha avanti, and if I'm lost, I am lost. Like shem shavanti based abba kach oivad mimcha. Just I am lost from my father's house, so too shall I be lost from you. Meaning, once I voluntarily submit to Achashverosh, so now I'm going to be forbidden to be the husband of Mordechai anymore. Why? Because so long as it was against her will, she's still a Jewish woman who is raped against her will, is not forbidden to go back to her husband if he's not a Kohen, right? If he's a Yisrael, she's allowed to go back to him. However, if she does it willfully, then she's no longer allowed. So she's saying like this, up until now, I was summoned and I had to go against my will. But from this point, if I'm going to go on my own accord, that means I want it. And if it's something that I want, that I initiate, then I'm going to be forbidden from my husband. And Tosfos on the side has a very interesting comment. Excuse me. He says, seemingly, why couldn't Mordechai and Esther just get divorced? In other words, up until now, she was allowed to stay married to Mordechai because what? Because she was forced. But now she was going to go on her own accord and she would be considered to be unfaithful, like a Zoina, right? And that would be forbidden for her to continue to remain married. So at this point, once you no longer have a choice, just go and get divorced from Mordechai. And the fact that you have relations with Achashverosh while you're no longer married to Mordechai wouldn't stop you at a later stage of getting married again to Mordechai at a later stage. So Tosfos answers that since it would have required a get, and a get needs witnesses, so the walls have ears, and he didn't want it to get out. They both didn't want to get out to Achashverosh that she was really married to Mordechai all along. Because remember, Achashverosh was looking for virgins, right? And the Gemara said previously that whenever he was with Esther, he tasted whatever he wanted to taste. If he wanted to experience being with a virgin, then that's what he would experience with Esther. If he wanted to experience being married to somebody who had already had relations, then that's what he would experience. So the point is, from that perspective, he wasn't able to know that she had already been married. But if it would get out through Adim and a get that now she was divorced from Mordechai, then it would have been a shanda that the king married somebody who was already married, and that's why they didn't do as Tosfos suggested to give a get, and then she would be able to go back to Mordechai. But the point is, she's saying she's willing to give up and lose out being married to Mordechai to save her people. Says the Gemara further. It says in the pasuk, "Vayavar Mordechai," and Mordechai passed. What does this mean? He passed. because you can understand it in two ways. One, you can understand it as crossing over, or it can mean that he transgressed. So Amar Rav says, Shehavir Yom Rishon Shel Pesach B'Tainis. It indicates that Mordechai supplanted the first day of Pesach with a fast, which was the 3-day fast that Mordechai declared on Esther's request. And it included the first day of Pesach, which means that what? That they passed by eating matzah and having a Pesach Seder. So it was a terrible thing, right? Of course, it was done in order to be able to save the Jewish people. But nevertheless, he passed over the Passover. Shmuel says, the Ovar Arkuma de Maya. It means that Mordechai crossed a pool of water, which means to say he went everywhere in Shushan to gather as many people as possible to tell them about the Tainus. Then Gemara continues, says in the Pasuk, it was on the third day, Batilbash Esther Malchus, and Esther clothed herself in royalty. Frank the Gemara, Big Day Malchus, mi boile. It should have said royal garments. Why does it miss out the word big day and just say Malchus? What does this mean? That she clothed herself in royalty, not royal garments. Amar Rabbi Loza, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina says, this teaches us that Esther was clothed in Ruach HaKodesh. Ksiv Haka, it says over here. Matilbash, and she clothed. Ksiv Hasam, it says over there. Ruach Lovsha, Amosai, it says elsewhere that the Spirit clothed Amosai. This is in Divrei Yamim. And so just like over there, it was with Ruach HaKodesh. So to over here, she was clothed with Ruach HaKodesh. So now we've already mentioned a teaching of Rebbe Loza in the name of Rebbe Chanina. We have a few more teachings in the name of Rebbe Loza in the name of Rebbe Chanina. So Amar Rebbe Loza Rebbe Chanina, Rebbe Loza says in the name of Rebbe Chanina, L'olam always al tibirchas hedit kalabenecha. A blessing given by an ordinary person should never be unimportant in your eyes. Sharei. Shnei Gedolei Hadar, two prominent people in their generation, Berchum Shnei Hadyetis, were blessed by two ordinary people, with the Skaima Behen, and their blessing was fulfilled. Ve'elahed, these are them, David and Daniel. It was David and Daniel. What happened with David? David, the Barchei Aravno, David was blessed by Aravno. It seems like it says, Vayema Aravno El HaMelech. Aravno says to the king. And what happened was over there that David HaMelech was asking for forgiveness, and he wanted Hashem to accept his tefillah. And Aravna said that Hashem should accept your tefillah, and we find that the tefillah was accepted, and the Magefa stopped. So that was the case with David. What about Daniel? So Daniel, the Varche Daryavish, Daniel was blessed by Daryavish. It seems like it says, Elakach the Ad Polach Le Misdira who Yesheziv Vinach, that Hashem, who you serve continually, he will save you. And this is the story with Daniel in the lion's den, and he was saved by Hashem, and this was in response to the blessing that he received from Daryavish. I mean, the question I have at least is, it's very nice that these people blessed him, right? But the question is, were these people really answered and saved because of these blessings, or was it on their own merit? So, for example, when David did tshuva and returned to Hashem and he davened to Hashem, how do we know that it wasn't his tefillah that brought about that this tefillah was accepted? And likewise with Daniel, how do we know that it wasn't his own righteousness that caused him to be saved? Why are we saying that these two people who blessed them, these two people that blessed him would be saved? You know, I heard a funny story that somebody went to Reb Chaim Kanevsky and he gave him a blessing. I give you a blessing that you should finish, so you should learn through the whole Talmud this year. And Reb Chaim responded and said, Amen, and like same to you. And the guy says, look, my blessings are even greater than Reb Chaim's. I gave Reb Chaim Kanevsky a blessing that he should finish the whole Shas in a year, and it was fulfilled. And he said to me, and I should also. And you see, his blessing wasn't fulfilled. I didn't go through the whole Shas this year, right? But the point is that, sometimes when you give a blessing, right, how do you know that that blessing is ultimately the cause of that tefillah being accepted? I don't know the answer to that. However, the Gemara seems to be saying that it is indeed in the merit of these two people that blessed David, who was in his own right very great, and Daniel, who also in his own right was very great. Nevertheless, it was the blessing of these two people that achieved for them the great blessing that they received. All right.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi, I want to interrupt, but since you already interrupted with the story, there's a famous story regarding the father of the President John F. Kennedy, that he was cursed on a ship that was coming over from Europe to the United States, and all these Jews were davening Yom Kippur, and he had told them, he was the head of the ship, and he told them, you have to be very quiet because the Nazis will attack the ship. And they were davening Yom Kippur, and their voices got a little loud, and the person that was leading the davening was too loud, and he got upset, and he slapped the person who was leading the davening. And this Jew, who was like a regular person in the crowd, told to Joseph Kennedy Sr. that you will live to see, because you slapped our rabbi, you will live to see all your children die.
Wow.
And then his first son died in the war, I think Joseph Kennedy Jr. And then John F. Kennedy was assassinated, the president. Then his brother Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. And then his brother was Edward Kennedy. And he had heard about the story, and he was in England, and the Belzer Rebbe was there. And he went into the Belzer Rebbe at the time and asked him, and told him the story, and asked him to please remove the curse. And the Belzer Rebbe gave him a bracha, but what happened was he was almost killed. He was involved in a plane crash that broke his back, and it almost killed him, but he was not killed.
Wow.
So you're just mentioning about like a plain Jew. That story came to mind.
Well, this segues right into the next piece of Gemara, which says, "V'amar Rebbe Elazar, Amar Rebbe Chanina." Rebbe Elazar says in the name of Rebbe Chanina, "Alti kilalas hedyet kalavenecha." A curse given by a ordinary person should not be unimportant in your eyes. Shaharei Avimelech kilal es Sarah. Avimelech cursed Sarah, as he says to her, "Hine hu lach sus inayim." Behold, it will be for you a covering of eyes, right? And what happened is, this curse was fulfilled in a child, as it says, it came to pass that when Yitzchok was old, his eyesight was dimmed. So we see the curse of even somebody as simple as Avimelech, not a righteous king or anything, was something that ultimately came to fruition. Another teaching from Rebbe Elazar by Rebbe Chanina in the name of Rebbe Chanina. Come and see that unlike the characteristics of Hashem are the characteristics of human beings. Why? Midas Basav Adam. Usually, how do people act? Shayface, Kedera. Is that first a person places a pot on the stove, and then he puts water in it. But when we talk about Hashem, first he puts the water in position, and then he places the pot around the water.
Rabbi, it's actually the opposite. Usually a person puts the ingredients in the pot, then pot on the water. No, I don't know people that put the pot on the stove and then put the ingredients in afterwards.
Now, the point is that you don't gather all the ingredients and then pull out the pot. The point is that you first pull out the pot and then you put in all the ingredients. Meaning you set up the pot first. It's not so. Whether it's on the stove or not is not so important. The point is that the pot has to be there before you put together all the ingredients. You don't take out all the ingredients and then bring the pot, right, to catch them. L'kai mashenema, the fulfillment of what it says, the sound of his giving a multitude of waters in the heavens. In other words, first came the water, and then Hashem separated them and gave them their domain, and the waters from below and the waters from above. They were all held in their place. But first he created them and then gave them their containers, so to speak. Another teaching of Rebbe Loza in the name of Rebbe Chanina, whoever reports a saying in the name of the one who said it, maybe he brings redemption to the world. Like it says, that Esther said to the king in the name of Mordechai. So how does that teach me? How does that teach me that whoever says something in the name of its source, they bring redemption to the world? So in this case, it seems very straightforward that Esther told the king in the name of Mordechai that Bixen and Seresh tried to kill him. And as a result of that, on that night when Haman was coming to tell Achashverosh to hang Mordechai on the tree, Achashverosh couldn't sleep. And that's when he asked whether there was maybe somebody who had done something good to the king that he hadn't repaid. And then he saw that Mordechai had done something good by saving his life. And as a result of that, it seems all the different things, all the different chain of events spiraled for Haman and for those who hated the Jewish people from that incident. However, I heard a different explanation about this, and I found it very beautiful. But I'm going to hold it until we get to another shtickle of Gemara a little bit further on. Hopefully we'll get there today, and then I'll explain how to make sense of this. Okay, next. Rebbe Loza says in the name of Rebbe Chanina, Tzaddik Avad, when a righteous person is lost, meaning he passes away, the L'Dorei Avad, he's lost only to his generation, because obviously his soul lives on. Mashal, this is compared to Adam Sha'avdoleh Margolis, a person who's lost a pearl, that called Makom Shehi Margolis Shema. Wherever it is, it's still a pearl. It's always going to be a pearl. The fact that you lost it is something else, but it itself doesn't stop being a pearl because you lost it. So effectively, it's only lost to its owner. So now, when we're going back to another part of the Megillah, and we have here a teaching from Rebbe Loza ben Rebbe Chanina. But remember, this is no longer following the chronology of how we've been interpreting the Megillah. We've been going in order. We've gone from the beginning of the Megillah all the way through. Now it seems that we're going back a little bit because this is the teaching of Rebbe Loza in the name of Rebbe Chanina. So he explains on the pasuk that says, all of this is worth nothing to me. Actually, it's not out of order. It's still in order. I apologize. It's still in order because this is when Haman comes and speaks to Zeresh, his wife, and to all his advisors. So Amr Rebbe Loza ben Chanina, he says, what does this mean? What does this mean? That all of this is not worth anything to me. He says, when Haman saw Mordechai sitting at the king's gate, Amar, he said, that all of this is not worth anything to me. That Rav Chisda said, that this is what Rav Chisda said, this one, Mordechai, came from a position of wealth, and this one, meaning Haman, came. We'll move over to Daf Tes Vav on the base, but praise Boiti, from a position of poverty. What happened? Rav Papa says, they called Haman the slave who was sold for loaves of bread, because what happened was that there was a famine, and there was many years earlier there was a famine, and Haman was starving, and Mordechai had food, and so he wanted to buy food off Mordechai. So Mordechai said, sure, I'm happy to give you food so long as you sell yourself as a slave. So he sold himself as a slave to Mordechai. And that's why he was called the slave who was sold for the loaves of bread. Now, here he is coming along. And he's elevated to the highest position. And he's amassing wealth, etc. But Mordechai is really his master. And anything that belongs to the slave really belongs to the master. So really, he's a poor man without anything because it really all belongs to Mordechai. So the Gemara continues and says, another exposition on Mechol Zeh Ein Shevili, says the Gemara, Mechol Zeh Ein Shevili, none of this is worth anything to me. This teaches that a record of all the treasures of that wicked man were engraved on his heart. Omar, when he saw Mordechai sitting at the king's gate, he said, Kol Zeh Ein Shevili. All of this, in other words, that which had been written on his heart over there, where a list of all his belongings, he says, is all worth nothing to me because it all belongs to Mordechai. For other, Rebbe Elazar Bar Chanina says, another teaching, that in the future, the Holy One he will be a crown on the head of every righteous person. Like it says, on that day, on that day, it says Hashem will be for a crown of beauty, right? What does it mean when it says for a crown of beauty and for a diadem of glory? So he says it's going to be a crown of beauty. This is the teaching that tells me that the reward's going to come for those who do his will and for those who await for his glory, for Hashem's glory. Now, says the Gemara, one might think that this divine coronation is going to be for everybody. Talmud Levi, this comes to teach us, L'she'ar Amoy. It's going to be to the remnant of his people. But what can we also understand from the word L'she'ar, She'ar, Lami Shemesim Asma Kishirayim? It teaches me that it's only for one who makes himself like remnants. In other words, he remains very humble. And since he remains very humble, that's why he is going to be rewarded with what? With this crown, with this crown of beauty. So here is where I want to explain what we said before about that anybody who says something in the name of the person who says it brings redemption to the world. Okay, so listen how this goes. We just said over here that what? Who does Hashem crown with beauty? Hashem crowns with beauty those people who make themselves humble. How do you make yourself humble? One of the ways to make yourself humble is when you say something that could bring you tremendous honor, right? And then you say, it's not my word. It's not something that I said, but I heard this from somebody else. Then that is a huge sign, a great sign of humility. And that's when Hashem crowns you with this glory, with this beauty. Okay, let's go to Esther for a minute. Esther, we said, she was called Hadassah because she looked green like a Hadassah, which means she was very unattractive. But at the same time, we say that she was given a special chut of chen. She was given a special grace that she should appear beautiful in the eyes of everybody, right? So when she came to King Ahasuerus, and this was when she wanted to invite King Ahasuerus to the party to do away with Haman, really what should have happened is Ahasuerus should have been repulsed by her because she didn't look pretty at all. But because prior she had gone and she had made Mordechai great by telling over what happened with Bigsan Viserys to the king in the name of Mordechai. So here she was acting in a great way of humility, because remember, if she's the queen and she can come now and say to the king, here, I'm going to save your life. Can you imagine? He would be indebted to her for the rest of his life, right? Instead, she went and she gave the credit to Mordechai. As a result of that, she was doing what it says in the Gemara, making herself humble, so she received that Hashem should make her look beautiful in the eyes of the king, and that was ultimately what led to the Geula of all the Jewish people. Anyway, that's I heard this teaching from Ramelech Biderman, and I heard it a long time ago. But I remembered it when I was learning this Gemara, and I thought I'd share it with you. Okay, says the Gemara. We said over here that what that who's going to merit this? The people who are humble. But then it goes on and says another category of people who are going to receive the divine reward. It says L'ruach mishpat, and for a spirit of judgment. What does this refer to? This refers to one who judges his evil inclination and forces it to do tshuva for any of the sins that it had done. Al hamishpat, and to one who sits in judgment. This means did emes lamitay. This is somebody who renders a judgment that is absolutely true. Now, what's this expression emes lamitay? So Tosfos over here, and you see the Tosfos in the middle of the page. It's very strange. Very few times you find the Gemara that looking like this, where the Tosfos is like stuck in the middle like that with the two Rashis on the side. But anyway, so Tosfos says over here, Hadan din emes lamitai. He says the reason why we use emes lamitai is to tell us that sometimes you can have witnesses who come along and testify. Now we know Torah tells us, right, that as soon as two witnesses, kosher witnesses, testify, you have to accept their you have to accept the testimony. And the testimony is considered as if there are 100 people testifying. It's considered to be as authentic as it gets, right? Now, what happens if two people come along and testify something, but something seems off, but you've got nothing to contradict what these witnesses are saying, so you could argue that I am being done din emes. I'm doing a true judgment. So he says it might be emes, but it's not emes lamitai. Why? Because if you really want to give a true judgment, you have to properly cross-examine these witnesses to be able to get to a point where if there's something you're concerned about, it will come to light, and through your cross-examination, you will bring the truth to the surface, and no stumbling block would come through you. And so that's the idea of non-emes la'amitai. And so for that, you're going to be rewarded. What does it mean for ligvura and for strength? Says the Gemara, this refers to somebody not who judges his evil inclination, but overcomes his evil inclination, not allowing him to sin. What's Meshivei Milchama? Those who turn back the battle. He says it refers to Shenaisin v'Naistin be'Milchamto shel Torah. These are the people who have a give and take in the battle of Torah, that they debate all the matters of Torah, arguing over matters of Torah. What's Sha'ara, to the gate? Eilu Talmidei Chachamim. This refers to the Torah scholars, Shemashkimim u'Marivim. They rise early and they go late. To and from the basic Knesses, and in the study hall.
Rabbi,
yes,
could the battle be between a person's Yetzer Hara, which is telling him to stay in bed, and his Yetzer Tov telling him to go to shul, like this is saying, he arrives early and stays late in the shul?
So it could mean that. It could mean that. And that would certainly be in line in what we've been learning up until now. However, over here, the Gemara wants to not only include the people who are fighting with the Yetzer Hara, right? But because, ultimately fighting with the Yetzer Hara is the idea of staying away from evil. In other words, overcoming obstacles. Here, when you're having arguments in Torah, that itself is a mitzvah, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So therefore, we wanted to include more people. We wanted to include more people that are going to be rewarded for the good that they do. Of course, fighting with the Yetzer Hara is a tremendous thing, but realizing that ultimately you've got to do something once you won the battle. Once you've gotten out of bed, you got to make sure you do good things with it. You've got to go to the study hall and study Torah. Okay, says the Gemara. The attribute of justice came and said before Hashem, Master of the universe, what's the difference between these people and these people, between the Jewish people and the nations of the world? In other words, why is it that we've just described all these rewards that are going to be given to the Jewish people? What about everybody else? Hashem says to him, to the attribute of justice, he says, Yisrael, Jewish people, they engage in the study of Torah. Whereas the nations of the world, they do not engage in the study of Torah. What we see over here is that it doesn't say, Hashem doesn't say because they do acts of kindness. Because acts of kindness, it seems, the nations also do. It doesn't mention other credits to the Jewish people, but rather it takes this idea of learning Torah. The learning Torah is of the greatest value, and so therefore Hashem says it's in the merit of the learning Torah. That's why the Jewish people are rewarded. Amalei. So the attribute of justice says to Hashem, it says, "V'gam ele b'yayin shogu u'msheichatou poku pelilia." We're going to explain what this means, but translation is they also reel through wine and stagger through strong drink. They stumble in judgment. So the Gemara proves that this verse is in reference to the judgment of Gehenna. Ein paku ela Gehenna. The word paku, they stumble, certainly alludes to Gehenna. Shenema, like it says, v'loi siyezei slecha lefuka. It says, and this shall not be a cause of stumbling to you. This is the story which we had in the Gemara previously about
Abigail to David.
That's right. And we said over there, it's referring to Gehenna. And the word Pelilia certainly means judges, and he shall pay as the judges determine. So now, going back to the Megillah and continuing with the exposition of the verses, it says over there, so this was after the 3 days of fasting. She comes and she stood in the inner court of the king's house. Reb Levi says, as soon as she reached the chambers of the idols, then what happened is the Shechina, the divine presence, departed from her. Amra, she cried out. This is from Tehillim, chapter 22. Keli, lama zaftani. My God, why have you forsaken me? In other words, she didn't understand why all of a sudden the divine presence had gone away from her. She no longer felt Hashem's presence. Shema atadon al shigik, amazing. Could it be perhaps that you treat an inadvertent offense like an intentional one? Well, eines karotzen, or an offense committed under coercion as one committed willfully? In other words, we said before that what? That Esther said, that really up until now, she had gone against her will. And that's why she felt that Hashem remained with her. But at this point, she went willingly, right? She went willingly, and that's why she said, but that's only with regards to the way she has to act as husband and wife with Mordechai from this point on. But vis-a-vis Hashem knows that this too is an oinus. This is something that she's going, not because she wants to be with him, but because she has to save the Jewish people. She has no choice. So therefore, why, Hashem, are you leaving me now? Why are you departing from me? Hashem's presence should still be together with me. Or perhaps, Al Shekarosiv Kelef. Maybe the reason why Hashem's presence has departed from me is because I called Achashverosh a Kelef. I called him a dog. Shenema, like it says, rescue my soul from the sword, my only one, from the grip of the dog, referring to Achashverosh. So she thought maybe I was being disrespectful to Achashverosh, and although he's a Rasha, but he's a king, and maybe I should still afford him respect. So therefore, she went back, she retracted, and she called him a lion. Shenema, and it says, save me from the lion's mouth, referring to Achashverosh. But really what had happened was, it's because she came to a place in the palace which was a chamber of idols. That's the real reason why Hashem's presence departed from her. She thought that maybe it was for another reason, but that's not really the reason. Okay, says the Gemara, says in the Pasuk in Megillah, when the king noticed Queen Esther standing in the court, so it says, right? And then he extended the Sharbet Azov to Esther, the golden scepter, he stretched out to Esther. Oma Rabbi Yechon says, Gimel Malache Hasharis Nizdamnu Lo Ba'isha. 3 ministering angels encountered her at that time. Echad Shigmias Savara, one that raised her neck. Remember, she's after 3 days fasting. She doesn't look great, right? So one of them raised her neck. The Echad Shemoshach Chut Shel Chesed Aleh, and one that endowed her with charm, right? The Echad Shemotach Es Hashabit, and one that stretched the king's scepter towards her, because when she came there, the king didn't immediately stretch out his scepter, so therefore a malach came along and did it, and caused the king to stretch out the sharbet, the scepter towards her. But the Gemara asks, how far did the angel stretch the scepter? Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Shtei amos hayah, it was originally 2 amos long, and the angel made it 12 amos long. And some say al sheshetzrei, he stretched it 16 amos. And others say al eser v'arba amos. Some say it was 24. But b'masnisa Tana al shishim in a brayse, it was taught that it was actually stretched to 60 amos.
It sounds like the Haggadah with the with the Makot.
Right. Very good. Yes. With the different opinions, whether it was 10 or 50 or 200.
100, 200.
Yeah. So once we were mentioning that the angels came and stretched out the scepter and extended it, we find that there was other extensions in the Torah, and that was the extension of the hand of the daughter of Parai when she was saving Moshe. We also find with the teeth of the wicked that they were stretched 60 amos. Like it says, Shine Rishayim Shibarta, the teeth of the wicked you have broken. Right? So Rish Lakish says, Atikre Shibarta, don't read it that you broke, Ella Shir Bavta, that you extended. What happened was, this was Og Melech HaBashan, when he lifted up a mountain to drop on the Jewish people, and a bunch of ants came and made a hole, and so it fell on his neck. And when he tried to lift it up, Hashem caused a miracle that his teeth should dig into the mountain 60 amos, and he could not remove it from on his head.
I remember another case that Pharaoh's daughter, her hand stretched out until she grabbed Moses.
Right, we just mentioned that above. That with the arm of the bas Parai. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, somebody else wanted to say
that was me. I was about to say the same thing that Ben said.
So maybe missed it. I'll go back again. Simply you find with the arm of Parai that
you didn't miss it. You said it.
I did say it. Okay.
Yeah, but you said Pharaoh. I'm saying the daughter of Pharaoh.
No,
that's what it says.
That's what it says. The daughter of Parai.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I missed it.
No problem. Okay. So now there's another opinion. Rabba bar Eifron, Abba Mishum, Rabbi Eliezer, Shishamar Rabbi. So this is a tradition that goes all the way back. It says Mosayim, it will stretch 200 amos. Okay. Says the Megillah further. It said in the Megillah, Vayem Eloha Melech. So the king said to who? To Esther, Malach Esther Malka. What do you want, Esther? And what is your request? Until half of the kingdom, and it shall be done. Right? Says the Gemara, when he offered her half the kingdom, but not the entire kingdom. And also, he wasn't offering her anything that would divide the middle of the kingdom. What was that thing that was in the middle of its kingdom, Binyan Beis Hamikdash, it was building of the Beis Hamikdash, because Yerushalayim was literally in the middle of his whole of the world, and he ruled over the whole world at the time. And so therefore, what it's alluding to when it says Ad Chatzia Malchus, till half of the kingdom, it refers to his refusal to allow her to go back and build the Beis Hamikdash. So now it says, Yovay HaMelech v'Haman el HaMishteh. Esther said, you want to know what I want? What I want is to invite you to a party. And before we get to that, I don't know, I have this question, and I'm wondering whether anybody else might have thought of this or has an answer. The way the Gemara is understanding what we just said is that Achashverosh is still clueless about who Esther is. So when he says, Ad Chatzia Malchus, say us, right, until half the kingdom, and it shall be done. And what he's saying is, I'm not going to give you permission to go and rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. What would give him the idea to say such a thing if he had no clue who Esther was? Why would Esther be interested in the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash? Understand the question?
Yeah,
At this point, what's the point?
he must have known that she's Jewish at that point.
Well, he couldn't have known that she was Jewish, because what we see right after that in the Megillah is that when she says that somebody wants to annihilate my people, Haman says, who? Right, but he says, me, who's that? Who? Yeah? Who's the person? What do you mean, who's the person? You don't know about the decree against the Jewish people? You don't know that I'm Jewish? Clearly, he didn't know that she was Jewish yet. Right? So why would he say that? Why would he say not that I'm not agreeing to allow to have the Beis Hamikdash be rebuilt? So I mean, this I'm throwing off the cuff. I'll look into it a little bit more, but I'm thinking like this. There's another Gemara that says elsewhere that if the Goyim realized how much benefit they received from the karbanos that were brought on their behalf, then they would have done everything. They would do everything to bring about the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. Right? In other words, the Beis Hamikdash wasn't just something that was a source of blessing for the Jewish people. It was actually a source of blessing for all the nations of the world. Right? And so possibly it could be that he assumed about Esther that she appreciated the benefit that would happen if the Jewish people were be allowed to go back and rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, and that's why he said, no, forget about it. Yes, it might be a source of blessing, but I don't want to allow for the Jewish people to go back to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, because perhaps he was afraid that he would lose his rule over the world. I'm not sure, but anyway, if anybody has any thoughts on it, or will come up with any thoughts tomorrow on it, we have. Yep.
Rabbi, perhaps he just didn't want to be beholden to anything related to Judaism, to God.
Right, but my question is, why would he intimate that he's not going to allow the Jewish people to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash in response to Esther's request? Like, she hasn't said anything yet. She just came in. She looks beautiful in his eyes. He stretches out the scepter and he says, what can I do for you? Up to half of my kingdom I'll give you. Right? So,
but why do we assume that the distance from Shushan to where the Beit HaMikdash is in fact half of his kingdom? From what I understand, he had a lot more, in probably in both directions. So I don't understand where they can say that implies that it's halfway to the Beit, it's to the Beit HaMikdash when he says that.
Look at Rashi. Rashi says, So he says, Binyan Habayis, this refers to building the Beis Hamikdash, Shu be'emsa shel olam, which is in the middle of the world. The Yuma, like it says in the Gemara in Yuma, Even Shiyas Mimenu Nishtzas Olam, the Even Shiyah from which the whole world is receives its water, or from where the whole world was established. But the point is that in the Gemara Yuma, it seems to identify Yerushalayim as being the center point of the world, the middle of the world. So that means it's the middle point of all his kingdoms, not so much from Shushan and everything else, but of the entire world. It's the middle point of the entire world.
I think we see that most of the kings of Persia, or maybe all of them at this time, knew about the 70 years that the Beit HaMikdash would be rebuilt. And they were thinking about it, whether they're going to allow it or not. So maybe it was on his mind at that time too.
So you're saying perhaps he thought that Esther was being sent by others who were thinking about the 70 years.
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea. Possibly. Anyway, let's go a little bit further and see what the Gemara says. It says like this. It says, what did she ask for? Let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I prepared for him. So the rabbi saw in the Brisa, what was Esther's reasoning? What was she thinking by inviting Haman? I mean, why would you invite Haman? You could just simply go, invite Achashverosh, give him good food, and tell him what's going on, and then have him decide to kill Haman. Why do you need to have Haman there at the party? So there are going to be 12 reasons given. Reb Lezer says, Pachim Tom Naloi, that she set a trap for him. She never, like says, you shall call him Lifnei Lepach, and says, may the table become a trap for them. Rabbi Shua says, is something that she learned from her father's house. And Emma, like says, if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. Rabbi Meir says, it's so that Haman would not be able to take counsel and then rebel.
Rabbi, can I say something?
Sure.
I think Esther's father died before she was born.
It's true.
So how can she say she learned from her father?
That's a good question. So Rashi says what it means is she learned from the children that came to the house, and they repeated these psukim. So she was hearing these psukim being said in the house of her father.
From others, okay.
Yeah. Rabbi Yehuda says, she invited Haman so that they would not realize that she's a Jew. Rabbi says, so that the Jewish people should not say, we have a sister in the royal palace who's going to go to the king on our behalf, and neglect praying for mercy from Hashem. In other words, if they see that she is doing everything in her power to annul the decree, then stop davening to Hashem. So therefore, she went and invited Haman so that they should think, oh, she's a traitor. She's gone over to the side of Haman, and therefore they should intensify their davening to Hashem. Rabbi Yossi says, she invited Haman so that he'd be available the whole time. Right? Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe says, perhaps Hashem would be aroused, right? By seeing that now that Esther has invited Haman, Hashem would be aroused, and he will make a miracle for us. Rabbi Shua ben Korcha says, I'll smile at Haman, so that the king is going to suspect us of being unfaithful and have us both killed. And once we're both killed, that would annul the whole decree. Rabbi Gamliel says, Melech Hafafchon Haya. He was he was fickle, you know, he would flip and flop all over the place. In other words, he'd make one decision one day and another decision another day. Rabbi Gamliel says, Adayin Tzrichin Anu L'Moidoi. We still need to have the reason of Rabbi Loza Hamidiya, right? So the Tanya says, Rabbi Loza Hamidiya says, Kin Atu B'Melech, Kin Atu B'Sarim. She made the king jealous of him, and she made other nobles jealous of him, because by inviting him, the king would be jealous. Why is he being invited to a meal that I should have only been invited to? And all the other ministers of the king would also be jealous. Why him and not us? And Rabba says, pride comes before destruction. So therefore, So therefore, she invited him so that he reaches the highest point, so that then he could be destroyed. Abai and Rava both say, when they are hot, I will prepare their feasts, etc. In conclusion, says the Gemara as follows: Ashkan Rabba Bar Avu Lelio, Rabba Bavu met Elio. Amalei says, "Keman Chazi Estim Amid Hachi." Of all the reasons that we just gave, which was the one that actually prompted Esther to do this? Amalei. So Elio answered, "Kulu Tanoi, Kulu Amaroi." Esther had all of these things that the Tanoim and the Amoraim in mind. All of these things influenced her. All of these considerations influenced her to make the decision to invite Haman. And we will stop here. I wish you all a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Wonderful day for everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.